is Yanina Slyesarchuk on Ukraine Today from Rome. We are here in NATO Defense College for the conference, which is devoted to defeating the hybrid threat. And here with us is Jamie Shea, Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Problems. Hello, Jamie. My first question is about informational pollution. We are talking about defeating these hybrid threats. What can be done by NATO to somehow reduce this influence of Russia in Western media?
Well, I think the first thing is that we've got to sort of look at the big picture and not allow our judgment to be affected just by one or two examples. The big picture, I think, shows that since it annexed Crimea March last year, Russia has lost massive trust among public opinion in Europe, in the United States, in Canada. Opinion polls show this. The trust in Russia has gone down by lots and lots of percentage points. Look at Germany, a country where the idea of cooperation with Russia has always been deeply rooted. German opinion polls show overwhelmingly now that the mood has changed, particularly in the wake of the shooting down the Malaysian airliner, towards now much less trust in Russia. So I don't believe, contrary to what some people say, that the Russian propaganda campaign has been particularly effective. There are obviously segments of society, particularly in diverse democratic societies like the NATO countries. There are always going to be particular NGOs or interest groups that represent the Russian view. Sometimes you discover that they also have direct links with Russia in terms of funding, which also then explains why they represent the Russian view. But opinion polls show that the mass of people now have a much more negative notion of President Putin and maybe not the Russian people, of course not, because the Russian people are a great and noble people, but of the Russian government. So that's the first point. Second point is that propaganda ultimately tends to be counterproductive. I always quote Abraham Lincoln. He said it 150 years ago, but it's still true today, that you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people or all of the time. Eventually, the facts get across. People compare what Mr. Putin is saying with the obvious reality that the Malaysian airliner didn't just disappear. It was shot down. That Russian forces are in Ukraine, for instance, that the Russian forces that are in Ukraine are not on holiday, but are there because their government has sent them there, that Russia has taken military casualties in Ukraine, several hundred of them. Those facts eventually get across. Third point, and here I do agree with you a little bit, is obviously we can't just sit back passively and allow Russia to communicate into our media space and not respond. That's clear. So it's true that we have to do as best as we can in stepping up our own strategic communications, in communicating the facts, in demonstrating where we have pictures, the actual reality of the situation. We have to counter the Russian narrative as effectively as we can, and we have to make certain that certain key segments of our populations, like the Russian-speaking populations, for example, in the Baltic states, don't just hear Sputnik or Russia Today or the other stations sponsored by Moscow, but have independent alternative sources of information. Absolutely, we have to do that as well.
Russian society is now quite mobilized. 86% of people who trust Putin, who support Putin's actions on Ukraine and anywhere else. How do you think how much time should go before Russia understands something's going on wrong, before this crisis will end?
That's a good question. My own sense is that when Mr. Putin first came to power, he promised economic prosperity to the Russians in return for more authoritarian government and less freedom. But he's not able to do that anymore because he can't deliver on the economic prosperity. He's now offering the Russians a diet of nationalism in exchange for less freedom, more propaganda, more authoritarianism, and lower living standards. I personally don't believe that's a deal that the Russian people will accept in the long run. You can't feed people, and you can't educate people, you can't allow them to have proper access to health services or pensions with nationalism. Nationalism has a short-term impact, yes, short-term euphoria, but it fades quickly. We saw that, for example, in the Balkans in the 1990s, when people woke up to the consequences and very rapidly turned against the dictators who had promulgated the nationalism in the first place. Think of what happened to Milosevic in that respect. So I personally believe that the Russians will wake up. I don't know when it's going to happen, but nationalism also depends upon more and more triumphs. You have to keep feeding the beast, and that's why I think it is very important that we keep a very clear set of sanctions in place against Russia, as long as it doesn't return to cooperation, which makes its possibility to embark on more nationalist adventures more difficult. So yes, I read the opinion polls like you do. How much of that, by the way, reflects true Russian sentiment or simply fear of speaking out against the authorities or expressing a different opinion, that's something that we can debate. But again, as I said to you before, nationalism doesn't feed any bellies in the 21st century.
Thank you, Jamie. It was Jamie Shea, Deputy Assistant of Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges on Ukraine Today.